Well, welcome, Therapy Flow community. We're here for an exciting time. Kasey Compton is joining us for today's live interview to dig into some details. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah,
excited to be here. I wish I could
I
see everyone's face, That's the
yeah.
only bad part about it.
Yeah, whether you're catching it live or the replay, you get the benefit of seeing us, but it doesn't always go the other direction.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we can dig into some fun stuff today in terms of processes. I think whether it was when we attended your conference or looking at some of the content you've written and you put out, your guys' newsletters that you send, just like reading and consuming that, you have some really unique ways, and you say some really like sometimes direct or blunt things into the therapy owner business space. But the outcome of it is helping practice owners grow and grow probably through some of like the uncomfortable business end of things that they like ignore or we don't want to work on, or maybe even like making sexy some of the unsexy parts of the business. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to dig into all of that. However, before we go too far, tell us a little bit about like how you got here, how you got to building, multi seven-figure practices, hosting conferences, and doing everything else, Kasey does on a day to day.
Totally on accident. 100%. No.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding. I wish. That would make it a little bit easier. At least it sounds that way.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of fell into this. I was a teacher and was a teacher for as long as I could be a teacher without getting a master's degree. Because I didn't really know if I wanted to stay in teaching or what I wanted to get a master's degree in, but I knew that something that had always appealed to me was business and anything where I could be creative, whether it was art, you name it, like creative through cooking, through baking, through everything, you name it, I've done it.
Right.
And yeah, so there were parts about teaching that I really loved, and I always ended up with like those stereotypical bad kids in my class. They weren't bad, but you know what I'm saying. Like the teachers would
Yeah.
stick them in there, and they were just my favorite. And I really enjoyed working with them, but I got to this point where I was like, I can only do so much as their teacher. And I found myself wanting to kind of step over that line sometimes and talk to them about, well, how's things going at home and what. And I thought, well, it just probably makes more sense to be a therapist. And if I'm going to be a therapist, then I'm going to have my own practice. I mean, I knew that from day one. So I knew that going into my
Yeah.
master's program. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I just kind of started down that road and went to school, started a practice, decided I didn't really know what the heck I was doing, went into agency work for a while, learned some stuff, came back into
As one
practice.
does, right?
Yeah, yeah, you think you know everything, and then you're like, oh, maybe I don't.
Yep.
But that was kind of fun. And then when I got back into it the second time is really when I felt in a lot of ways like I was in survival mode because I was coming from a bad financial situation and was really fearful of um, just having my future in someone else's hands. That didn't sit well with me. And I just decided I'm going to go for it and started that practice. And that was in 2015. And had no experience whatsoever with
Yeah.
business and just read a lot of books and spent a lot of time at the library and did all of those nerdy things and figured it out. And
Was there a moment when it felt like you transitioned out of the I don't know what I'm doing, I'm kind of fearful, I'm trying to figure this out, like what when was that transition?
um, it was happening before I even realized it was happening. I mean, I think other people could see it, see that confidence. I call it entrepreneurial confidence that
Yeah.
most often we don't know we have until we've had it for a while. And I started noticing that, eh, like business kind of sucks sometimes because it just does. Like, I mean, you're having to deal with all of it. You're dealing with the people, which is is just like a job in and of itself.
Right.
And you're dealing with the numbers, and you're dealing with the systems, and you're dealing with the marketing and the leads, and like literally everything. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's humanly possible or even sane to think that we are
Yeah.
good at all of those things. Um, but over time, like when bad things would happen, I would, because it already happened before, and I learned from those mistakes because I went into the business just being very open-minded and humble, that I started figuring it out and it got easier. And then
Yeah.
other people around me started noticing it. And actually, I didn't really feel confident until another consultant approached me and said, "Hey, do you want to join my team? Like, you're doing something different that most people aren't doing." And
Right.
I'm over here just thinking that I'm doing what everybody else is doing because I don't know.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "No, you're doing it different, and I think people can benefit from what you're doing." And so that's kind of how it. And that was like 2 years in,
Okay.
probably.
Yeah. I know that, by some people's perspective, the growth you had in terms of like revenue, practice size, locations,
Hmm.
some would define as like fast, adventurous, scary, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, that 0 to 10 clinicians, or that maybe even
Hmm.
like 0 to million-ish annual revenue, just depending on how all those numbers lined out. Like what marked that? How did that feel like? How did you grow through that initially?
Um. Okay. So this is coming from a person who, I said, I was coming out of a very bad financial situation. So, short version of that was, I was a therapist at an agency, found out I was pregnant. It was super high risk, had to go on strict bed rest at 20 weeks, obviously couldn't work because telehealth wasn't a thing back then.
Right.
Um, and I felt very out of control of my life and my professional and just everything and
Yeah.
finances. And I just remember like getting bank statements in the mail thinking, I'm not opening this. Like, I don't want to know. And so, like, I took pretty much that whole time while I was on bed rest and just built up the nerve to face my fears, which at that point was numbers and the reality of like being broke and poor and everything
Right.
else. And so when I started the business, I was just like doing some basic math, like, okay, here's what a reimbursement is. Here's how many therapists we're going to have, maybe two. This is what I project. And my projections in that first year and in that second year were literally spot on.
Yeah.
And that was luck. I don't think that wasn't skill. So it was certainly luck at that point.
Right.
And and honestly, people say, "Well, you grew really fast." And but from my end, I was holding the brakes. Like, I had my foot on that brake. I could
Yeah.
have literally exploded the company because what I saw was such a need that my community was not meeting. And there were so many places that wanted our services. And so I knew it was really pretty simple. Like, I have a demand, here's the supply, I have to hire the therapist. And so while I was growing it that way, it felt like it was not that fast on my end while I was doing it, but to other people they were like, "Well, how did you get to 1 million by the second year?" It's numbers. I
Right.
mean, it's just math. And so we just kept hiring, and I knew that each therapist would generate about $80,000 in revenue. So if I wanted to hit 1 million, well, I needed nine,
Right.
right? I mean, so hire nine. Um, but it took a lot. Like I said, I was learning, so it took a lot out of me mentally and emotionally and physically. And
Yeah.
so, that part of it I wasn't prepared for, but the rest of it, it really didn't feel like it was an explosion. Like, it really did feel like we had some form of control over what we were doing as we were doing it.
And I think when we have those conversations with our new group practice owners and just growing group practice owners, it's the same thing. It's
Mhm.
in some ways when you measure it by the clinician, like the 1 to 2 that you keep adding, knowing the
Mhm.
consequence of that if you keep them full will
Mhm.
be that 80 to $100,000 of revenue. It sort
Mhm.
of gives you a sort of a manageable perspective on like what growth is, right? It's like, well, I
Mhm.
just have to hire ten people and like manage that. And it can
Yeah.
sound like really reductive and simple because one, it can be,
Mhm.
but you also mentioned the emotional toll, the process,
Oh.
everything, right? And I
Mhm.
imagine that in some ways became heavier as you added more team members, as you added more admin. Tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about then what happens next. I know you talk about like
Mhm.
business systems and other things, but like, well, as you surpassed 10 and you went to 15 and you went to 20,
Mhm.
like what did you have to learn along the way to make sure that hiring one clinician and adding them to your team, sort of going one at a time, it continued to be sort of that simple?
Yeah, I knew that what I was doing was not sustainable, and, because, I was still at the point where I was doing a lot of things myself, and I remember just hitting this wall one day, and I was oh, yeah, it was just it was rough because I sacrificed a lot, to get to that 10 clinician mark. I sacrificed a
Yeah.
lot of time and, energy and all of the things like everybody else does. But I just remember thinking, "Okay, I'm not a pessimist. I'm just a realist." And I just thought, if it took this much of me to get to this million, how in the world am I ever gonna get to 2,000,000? Like, I don't
Yeah.
have anything left to give.
Right.
So, there has to be a solution. And so now it seems obvious, but back then, I was so in the weeds that I didn't even notice, like, everything going on. And I had someone come to me, a friend at the time, and he'd been in business for a really long time. And he was like, "Look, I'm gonna give you some advice." He said, "You're gonna have to figure out how to duplicate yourself." And
Yeah.
so that was the first thing I did was, really looked at my skill set, like what I was doing, and figuring out who do I need that's gonna help make more of me. And over time, that evolved into more of a systems and process thinking approach where we developed systems that would kind of take my place in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
we leaned more heavily on the system instead of in the process instead of the person.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we continue to scale it from that 10. I like to say that it's the hump or the middle, messy middle or whatever, but usually like 8 to 12 therapists, like you get in this hump and it's almost like it's too many to still do everything yourself, but it's
Right.
not enough to be profitable enough to hire someone to run it. And
Yeah.
so you have to get creative right there. And I think that a lot of people are forced with a decision at that point. Do I stay under the hump
Hmm. Right.
or do I scale and just take that leap?
Yeah.
Um, I
It's
don't know.
I sometimes describe it as like you're rolling a boulder up the hill, which is your business. And if you
Mhm,
stop, does it roll back
mhm,
on top of you? Or
yeah,
if you stop, does it just like sit there and wait for you to
mhm,
come back to it? And that's
yeah,
what like hopefully systems and your operations and your people do for you is like, well, if I stop growing this, if I stop at 8, well,
mhm,
what happens then? If I stop at 15, what
yeah,
happens then?
yeah,
And kind of go up from there.
yeah. I do think each person is able to find their sweet spot based
Yeah.
on their overhead and like how much they want to do in the business and just their own personal lifestyle. I think that there is a sweet spot for everybody. And you just have to be able to figure out what that is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Do you feel like now that have a lot of coaching and consulting conversations and you've seen hundreds of practices in various sizes try and navigate some of these like weird transition points, like what advice maybe from like the mindset perspective would you give them to try and like navigate those points where they're at their max and things are breaking and they're trying to decide like
Mhm.
where to go next?
Mhm. Two things really. One is don't do it alone. Um, when people are telling me these things, it's kind of cute sometimes. I feel for them because I've been there. But, they'll tell me these things like, how much they're struggling or they're confused, like I've never heard it before, like
Right.
nobody else has that problem. I'm like, "Yeah, I talked to 5 other people earlier today, and they're all struggling with this exact same thing." So one, like really reach out to people that are in your community and use their support. But two, I think you have to it just goes back to numbers. It's just data.
Yeah.
And so like if you were a fly on the wall here in my practice, you would hear me talking to my team very much like you have data driven Casey, and then you have like motivational Casey. Which one do I need? Like, am I trying to teach them something? I'm going data. If I'm trying to get
Right.
them to do something that I know that they don't really want to do, I'm going the other route. Um, but we're just really looking at the business in terms of a triangle, and that foundational level of that business is based on sales. We have to drive leads. We have to have
Right.
clients, and we have to have therapists. Without that, we have no business.
Right.
And so really just kind of always defaulting back to that is our foundation, and is that foundation secure? And if not, then that is where we have to focus. Like if our foundation in our house was crumbling, we wouldn't go remodel the attic. We're gonna focus on the base because that's gonna strengthen everything else just consequently. Um, so
Yeah.
I think that those are the two things. We have to, in a lot of ways, take our emotion out of it and just look at here's the issues and here's the data and here's where we need to be focusing our attention in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I heard a couple big things from you. Number one is new clients are a necessity. And if you
Mhm.
don't figure out how to make that work, you're kind of stuck with a broken business. That's kind
Mhm.
of the input that makes it all run. Number
Yeah.
two is you kind of have two brains. You've got that data driven, systems driven, like got to build something, measure something, do something, versus the motivation, the emotion of like either myself or my staff, like we have to have the energy to go
Mhm.
and get after it,
Mhm.
and in some fashion or another, not doing it alone. Probably like marketing providers, help, consultants,
Yeah.
course material, all of that fun stuff. It will go to accomplishing the end of what
Mhm.
you just described, which is more growth, more
Mhm.
inquiry, some of those things.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember when we used to take leads for granted. And I think most practices are either you're going to have two problems always, almost always. You're going to have too many clients, not enough staff, or too many therapists, not enough clients. And
Yep.
it's like a teeter totter.
Yeah.
And so you have to have a system where you can go up and you can go down and you can
Yep.
balance. And you have to be in control of that because imagine having no control over the two things
Yeah.
that make you actually have a business.
Right.
And a lot of people, they take that for granted and they just think, "Oh, well, it's just going to happen magically." And it doesn't, because we've been at points where we've had, up to 40 new referrals a day, up till we've had 2.
Right.
And so like feeling that getting more of a sense of control over that system. 100%. I mean, that's a foundational need that our businesses have.
Yeah. And I think, for some, they maybe have felt that tension between what we would call like the recruitment and hiring of new therapists and the tension of how do I keep my team full? And usually
Mhm,
stress around one of the two is pretty high of like, oh my gosh, I can't find anyone. What do I pay? How do I hire? How do I advertise to get new therapists in the door?
mhm,
And then on the flip side, right, it's like, well, how do I get my next 10 inquiries? Like, why could I even justify hiring? And I think at
mhm,
the end of it is we do need to build a process and a system that works for both
mhm,
with knowing that it's that teeter totter. right?
Mhm.
And it's always that back and forth. We're going to hire 3 therapists and we have to fill them out, and then if we want to grow,
Mhm.
we'll have to hire the next 3 and fill them out. And like
Yep.
it's kind of that never ending cycle of the problems your business feeds you. And maybe you can kind of talk about that. You've done this long enough, you've grown the business more than large enough. Like,
Mhm.
how have you continued to accept the business problems that it continually gives you and your team every single day?
So I'm wondering if any of your community right now that are listening or that are watching replay has ever gone through a phase where they're like, I'm going to learn to play the guitar. That's kind of a thing. And I went through that phase
Yeah.
myself long time ago. And those little things that happen to the tips of your fingers, when you first start playing and your fingers hurt really, really, really bad, and then over
Sorry.
time you
Weird feedback there.
oh, yep, can you hear me? Did you lose me?
Still with you? Still with us?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Can
Sorry.
you hear me?
Continue.
That's okay.
Yep. Weird glitch.
You know, it's probably me. But you build calluses to it, I think. And
Yeah.
w- what I have been able to do in the past 9 years in doing this is really be able to take in a problem and quickly filter, is this urgent? Is this impactful? What is it? Like, where does this fall on my priority sense of urgency list? And that's helped me a lot because I remember back in the day, you get a bad review on Google and like it's the end of the world, like your whole business is crashing down,
Right.
and you just think, oh my gosh, I don't even care anymore. Like, I don't want them, but
Right.
what are you going to do about it? I mean, there's no sense in derailing your whole business traction here. It's not like rolling that big stone up that mountain. You're just going to say, hang on just a second, let me just walk over here and work on this. You can't do that. You really
Right.
have to just be steadfast in the path that you're taking. So I think a lot of it for me, I don't get worked up about a lot. I mean, it takes a lot. And that's just maybe it's just like a survival skill that I've learned in business. But that's a big one. It's just in the way that I make those decisions, is this something that I'm going to stop what I'm doing for? Is basically going back to that triangle that I wrote about in Fix This Next for healthcare. And if it's on that foundational level, if our business has a need that's unmet in that foundational level,
Right.
which is, revenue, client leads, staff, delivering and collecting on commitments, then yeah, I'll stop what I'm doing and pivot back and make sure that that's steady. Otherwise, I don't stop what I'm doing every time that there's a little distraction,
Yeah.
or else you never really. If you're feeling like you're constantly doing, but you're not ever actually transforming anything,
Right.
that's a sign. That's a sign that you're doing the wrong things at the wrong time, or maybe the right things at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see both, and it's tough. I think
Mhm,
I've always viewed business as being a very noisy process. In some
mhm,
ways, there's like a million things that are all screaming for your attention. And the longer you do it and the more you do it, the better you get at being like, oh, nope, this is the thing that like
mhm.
actually needs my attention first. And then also
Yeah.
the longer you do it, like all of that noise kind of drifts into the background and you get really good at just going to the big one thing
Yep.
in your business that actually deserves your time and your
Yeah.
attention. It's going to move it forward.
Well, I was just telling my team, I have a meeting with them every Wednesday, not the therapist, but all the admin. And I said, I kind of have a new rule for you all. And that is, so my business was very much running without me for a long time. And there was an instance where I had to let go of one of my main people that was in charge of operation type things. And something told me that I just needed to insert myself back in. And so
Yeah.
I did. I listened to that and I inserted myself back in and I started to uncover a lot of not big cracks, because if it would have been a big crack in the foundation, I would have known about it,
Right.
but little ones, like lots of little ones, more than I was comfortable with. And what I realized that had been happening for a long time is it's not that my team couldn't recognize that there were problems. They knew. They just weren't doing anything about it. They would talk about it, but there was no plan to fix it.
Yeah.
And see, I'm the opposite. Like, if you come in here and tell me, oh, we got a problem, 90% of the time, I'm just going to issue, here's how, go fix it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I like to sit on it a little bit. But when I realized that they were doing that, I said, from now on, you can't complain without a plan. And so if any one of you complains to any of the other of you have to ask the question, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And they were all just like sitting there staring at me like, and then one of them told on themselves. They were like, actually, we've been complaining about this one thing in our meetings for a while now, so we probably should have a plan, right? And I was
Yeah.
like,
Like,
yes, do that now.
yeah.
um, so
And it's
sometimes,
yeah, it's so true even for like ourselves. And we have a very similar philosophy in our business, and I have to hold myself to it as well. Like when
mhm,
myself and my partner Tilio are moaning about something in our own business, we're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, are we
yep,
just like shooting the crap about this, or are we actually like going to take the time to solve this right now? Because if we
yep,
aren't going to slow down and take the time to solve this right now, or like in the near future to prioritize it, then
yeah,
it kind of just doesn't deserve to be in the conversation, because anything can be in the conversation. There's so much
mhm,
to talk about all the
yep,
time, but we have like so limited of a capacity to like actually fix. Like we have to go
mhm.
one crack at a time, no matter how many cracks there are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I grew up in a family where my mom and my stepdad would come home from work, and we lived in like this little cabin out in the woods, and my room was like upstairs in the lofts, like in the very tip. And so it was open to the downstairs and I could hear everything. And they would just complain about their day, about somebody's doing them wrong and somebody's doing this and blah blah. And I it could have very easily turned me into that person, but it
Yeah.
was so bad that I just remember thinking, "I'm never going to do this." So, you will hardly ever hear me complain because I'm probably spending that time solving that problem rather than talking about it. And that's just how I grew up, and it was something that was embedded in me. So,
Yeah. And this is something that, we've heard you speak about, and you were even just referencing it a little bit, but that leadership and what you shared was
mhm,
a very direct example of how you are leading your team to just improve the practice. And it's your leadership that creates the actions more than it is like now
mhm,
you are doing the action. Do you have any other
mhm,
maybe thoughts or comments for the person that has the larger team that wants to continue to grow, and that sort of leadership is the muscle they need to grow in? How did you do that?
mhm.
Where do you recommend someone start when they're at that stage of practice development?
Man, you would have to ask me that question. That I'm just gonna be really honest. That's probably my biggest area of growth that I need is in leadership personally. I've done a lot. I I'm like you said earlier, I mean, I'm just very direct and I almost have too much patience, which I think a lot of practice owners do. You have too much patience
Yeah.
until you hit this point where you're like, you're messing with my life. Like,
Right.
enough's enough. You have to do your job. And so at that point, like I kind of, it's not a pretty Casey, but I'm working on that. Um, so within leadership, I think once you have that larger team, the biggest thing that that I do that's been the most effective is making sure that every person in every position has a very clear, measurable, an attainable goal.
Yeah.
Because if they don't know what they're working toward, then how can you really hold them accountable? And how can you
Yeah.
have very direct conversations about their job? And I read the book The Goal, and I loved that book. That's one of my favorite books, but it totally changed my mind about how you set up your business. And since we've been operating under these goals, it's made our team so much more cohesive, and they understand each other's job better. And there's so much beauty, as crazy as it sounds, when you have them all sitting there and you have your biller whose goal is 0% in AR past 60 days. You have your marketing person who is supposed to get 40 leads a week. You have,
Right.
all these people, and they all look at each other, and they have this epiphany of, oh, I can't meet my goal without you, and I can't meet my goal without you, and none of us can do this without each other.
Yeah.
And so I think really fostering that type of education, and I think we need to spend more time as business owners in almost a coaching capacity.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I noticed that you're struggling with these conversions. Why don't you do a few? Let me see how you're doing it and see if I can think of anything that might help you. Like we're sometimes we're like standing up here trying to delegate, but what we really need to be is sitting here on the sidelines coaching. Now, was
Yeah.
there a better way to handle that situation, or what's your plan? And I like to do that a lot too, is like put it back on them. I notice this is a continuing problem. What's your plan to fix it?
Yeah.
Um, so I would say goal setting and just that accountability piece with it as well.
Yeah. And that creates a lot of buy-in. When we were with you at Meet You in Kentucky this past year, we got to interact with a number of your team members. It was so obvious that your team was bought into the vision, to the process,
Hmm.
to the outcomes, and really to their role of just
Yeah,
showing up, being them, and participating in the team. So in some ways, like, you are doing that well, and that's a good example.
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that then. We first had a chance to meet officially for the first time at that Meet in Kentucky conference. For those who haven't heard of it, it's, Kasey has put together a really great group practice, owner specific conference development, talking about a lot of these frameworks, processes, systems, operations,
Hmm.
recruitment,
Hmm.
all of these fun things. And I know that you're planning a really fun docket. Before we even talk about any of those things, what do you feel like is important for practice owners to like learn and take away in some of these settings? Like, why does it exist? Who does it exist for?
Yeah, the conference, well, I used to go to a lot of conferences, and I don't know about you, but I get really excited when I love to learn. So like teach me stuff, let me I love that. But they would go by so fast that it was like I would get home and life would set in and I would run out of time, and then the more that the time passed, the less it was fresh in my brain, and so the less
Right.
chance of implementation. And so we really wanted to have something where people could come and learn and do. So we wanted to provide that space where people can learn something and then go do something about it. And so, like, having that work time in there and breakouts and workshops and things like that.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things that we designed with our conference that's different is we really encourage the practice owners to bring their teams. So we have special tickets for, we just call them work wives. Um, but lots of work husbands come and work people. But we really encourage that, because there's no way that I could do what I do without my team. Absolutely no way. I would
Yeah.
never do this again by myself, even if it was outsourced people. It doesn't, that's still your team.
Yeah.
And so I really want to encourage that sense of team. And so this year, in 2024. I'm so excited because we've never done this before, but our conference this year is going to be broken out in 3 tracks. And I actually have written a new keynote that is going to teach these 3 fundamental C's of
Yeah.
practice, which is the company, the clients, and the clinicians. And so we have these 3 tracks that are focused on the people who are in charge of the health of the company, the health of the clinicians, not physical health, but like utilization, productivity, retention, all that,
Yep.
and then the client. And so we're just super, super excited. And this it makes it so unique because I don't know any other conference out there that is doing what we're
Yeah.
doing.
It's incredibly contextual, and I love that. The company, the clients, and the clinicians. And, if
Hmm.
you're listening and you're trying to even like process what's going on inside of my company right now, the chaos, the process, the cracks,
Yeah,
what's next, like
the
just take that,
culture.
just take that bucket, right? And just say, hey,
Yeah.
does my company, do my clients, or do my clinicians need more attention right now?
Where do I need to
What
focus?
who's more important right this second, this week, this month, and,
Yep.
and dig into it and some of those
Yep.
things. So, as we kind of wrap up here, a couple last questions for you. Number one is, you mentioned the one book. Any other good reads when you were on the library stage, or anything that you're reading right now? What are you consuming that's been helpful?
Oh my gosh. Well, any of McAllowitz's books are
Yeah,
great. He has the new one, All In, which is amazing. It's because it's focusing on the one thing that we all struggle with if we're practice owners, and that's recruiting, hiring, and retention.
yeah,
So that's a good one for sure. Profit First for finances, Story Brand for copy on your website, emails, stuff like that. Um, gosh, there's just a bunch.
yeah.
The
Those are
goal,
some great ones. Yeah, we can we
yeah.
can leave it there. All of those have been great resources that we've dug into as well. And
Yeah.
then any last thoughts about the conference specifically? When is it? Who, again,
Mhm.
who's kind of the best person to show up for it? Share a couple of those facts.
Yeah. So we really, the conference is designed for existing practice owners. If you are still thinking about starting a private practice, I'm not saying that it won't help you, because it certainly will give you lots and lots and lots and lots of information.
Yeah,
One of the things that we always do, I tease Emily, who puts it all together, and tell her we should sell it, but we make these bound workbooks that has like, they're like 60 pages full of everything you could imagine in there. But it's really for more practice owners who have already started, and
yeah.
people that are looking to scale or stabilize, one of the two,
Okay.
stabilize or scale. But yeah, we have people that have two clinicians, and we have people that have 100.
Yeah.
And so really there's a big range in there.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And people who don't want to do it themselves, like who really want that team.
Yeah, about building the team. I'll
Yeah.
be excited to talk about some of those things. Therapy
Yeah.
Flow will be there. I'll be doing some sessions. I'm
Hmm.
just excited for as well. And
Yeah.
then the last thing that I kind of want to end on, this will be our last question today, is I just talked to so many practice owners who, regardless of the side of their business, they're a solo, they're growing their group for the first time, they've got 15 clinicians, whatever it is, they're
Hmm.
discouraged. They
Yeah.
are they're beaten down a little bit about their business. We talked about earlier. It's hard. A lot comes
Hmm.
at you. Some of those things. You've been, I'm sure, through many seasons of hard, many seasons of full, many seasons of lots of profit, whatever it
Yeah.
is. And there's some resilience there. What would you say to the practice owner that just needs maybe a little bit more pep in their step to finish out the rest of this year and continue to go after their goals?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you didn't sign up for this thinking it was going to be easy, right? Like you knew it was going to be tough. And there's times where you cannot see that light at the end of the tunnel. Like you're going through something and it's hard, and it just seems to just keep getting you and getting you and getting you. Even though you may not see that light, someone else does, because someone else has already been through it. And the thing that you don't wanna do, unless it makes sense, with data, is give up. You know,
Yeah.
you don't wanna give up, because there are so many people that need you, and you did this and you started this for a reason. And I think when it gets hard, you just have to remember why you did it in the first place,
Yeah.
and reach out to somebody that can just either give you a good kick in the rear or a little pep talk, whatever it is you need.
Yeah.
Because there are people out there that are doing this, and you are needed. I mean, the world does not need a bunch of drive-through group practices. They need
Yep.
group practices with leaders that care.
100%. And that's
Yeah.
that's it. Is like when you can build and develop a practice that actually has the client impact, it's worth it. It's worthwhile.
Mhm.
The business will
Mhm.
come, the revenue will come, and like you said, whether it's a little bit of a pep in your step, some encouragement, or a swift kick in the pants, know what you need, and like get some support and help, because both are needed for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, Kasey, such a pleasure. Thank you for some of the wisdom that you shared today. Thank you for some of the feedback. Some people even have already left some comments asking for replays, asking for other things. And so thank you for the source of kind of wealth here, the 3 C's, and sort of the nuggets of that headed into 2024 here.
Yeah.
And we'll, I'm sure, bring you back. There's a million other rabbit holes that we could have gone down today,
Please.
other than some of this overview. So we'll see you again soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Catch you next time.